Chosen one, block your focus on my voice right now. That nagging thought, the one telling you the battle isn't over. Silence it. The enemy has been trying to sow seeds of doubt in your mind for one reason and one reason only. He knows you won. He knows that quiet victory just shut him down. It all ends today. The lingering uncertainty, the self-doubt, the feeling of quiet defeat. But hear me clearly, it's not ending because of coincidence. It's ending because of your unwavering strength in the silence. Think back to that moment just a few days ago, when you felt utterly defeated, trapped, and you chose to hold your tongue instead of lashing out. You thought you were failing that test, didn't you? You didn't know it then, but that specific moment of silent surrender was not defeat. That was the most powerful weapon you could have wielded. You didn't just survive, you architected your victory in complete silence. You did not stumble upon this message by chance. The algorithm didn't bring you here. Divine orchestration did. This is a sacred appointment, written in the stars for this exact moment, a moment of divine unveiling. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal the exact moment you sealed your victory without even realizing it. I'm going to decode the enemy's final desperate lie that's still attempting to cloud your mind, and at the end we'll activate a declaration that solidifies your quiet win, making it irreversible. Do not scroll past this. The version of you that endured that test in silence. They need you to hear this. If you leave now, you risk diminishing the power of the victory you've already secured. I know the last 72 hours have felt like the quiet after a storm, but there's still a hum of anxiety in the air. Maybe you woke up at 400 in the morning this week with an unshakable sense of peace, even though your circumstances haven't visibly shifted. Or perhaps you found yourself in a situation yesterday where you could have responded with anger, could have defended yourself, but you chose to simply walk away. That quiet surrender felt like weakness, didn't it? You've been hovering in a strange space, haven't you? A space where you know something monumental has shifted, but you can't quite grasp it. And in this space, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. Listen closely to your thoughts. He's telling you that because there was no loud clash, no visible drama, no public confrontation, that the test isn't truly over. He's replaying that moment from last week when you chose silence instead of shouting your truth, telling you that your quietness was apathy, that your restraint was weakness, that you somehow missed your opportunity to truly win. But I need you to hear what the divine truth actually says about this moment. The universe declares the deepest victories are often forged in the quiet chambers of the soul. You weren't inactive in your silence. You were strategically positioning yourself. You weren't avoiding the fight. You were winning it on a higher plane. Your stillness was not stagnation. It was the ultimate act of faith, allowing the divine to clear the path you couldn't see. The lingering quietness you feel isn't the sign of an unfinished battle. It's the profound peace of a war decisively won. It's the calm after the hardest storm of your life has passed. You thought your silence was surrender, but let me reframe your reality right now. Your silence was the declaration of your absolute victory. The hardest test is indeed over, and you won in silence. But here's where most people get stuck. They survive the fire, they endure the wilderness, they quietly overcome the giants, but they never truly leave the battlefield. The victory is real, but the inner posture remains one of defense, of waiting for the next attack. It's as if their spirit knows they've crossed a threshold, yet their soul is still braced for a war that has already concluded. Think about what that really means for a moment. The sword is still raised, the shield is still up, the eyes are still scanning the horizon for threats that no longer exist. The body is still tensed in the posture of someone preparing to absorb a blow that is never going to come. This isn't just about moving on. It's about disarming the internal mechanisms of survival that, while vital during the fight, now hinder the very peace and purpose you've earned. Those mechanisms served you beautifully in the fire. Your hypervigilance kept you alert. Your guardedness kept you from being blindsided. Your emotional armor kept you functional when lesser things would have shattered you completely. But armor that cannot be removed ceases to be protection and becomes a prison. And there is a profound difference between a warrior at rest and a warrior who has forgotten how to rest. Like Elijah, who after his greatest triumph on Mount Carmel still found himself fleeing into the desert, not from Jezebel, but from the lingering shadow of the battle within his own soul. He had won, yet the expectation of struggle still dictated his steps. Consider the weight of that story. Here was a man who had just called fire down from heaven. Here was a man through whom God had demonstrated absolute, undeniable supremacy over every false god that stood against him. The prophets of Baal had cried out for hours and received silence. Elijah had prayed once with quiet confidence, and heaven answered with consuming fire. By every measurable standard, the battle was over. The victory was total, and yet, within hours, one threatening message from one queen sent this mighty prophet running into the wilderness, collapsing under a juniper tree, begging God to take his life. How does that happen? It happens because the battle had not yet ended inside of him. It happens because when you have been in the fire long enough, your nervous system begins to assume that fire is simply the natural condition of your existence. And so even after the fire is gone, your soul keeps generating heat, keeps producing the chemical signals of crisis, keeps bracing for an impact that is no longer coming. Elijah's body had crossed the Jordan, but his soul was still on Mount Carmel, still fighting, still waiting for the next assault. That is the exact condition that too many chosen people find themselves in today. Geography has changed, circumstances have shifted, the season has turned. But internally, something ancient and battle-worn is still standing guard over a door that no longer needs guarding. What you just heard wasn't entertainment. It was confirmation, and if you're ready to go deeper, the Chosen One's blueprint will show you exactly why God separated you before birth, why the attacks came so early, and what He's unlocking in this season. You'll also get the full audiobook version and a powerful bonus, activating your prophet mantle for those carrying a prophetic fire they haven't yet learned to release. The link is waiting in the first pinned comment, but not for long. The first profound shift required is to truly acknowledge that the test is over, not just intellectually, but deep in your bones. There is a tremendous difference between knowing something in your mind and knowing it in the marrow of your being. You can understand with your intellect that the battle has concluded. You can articulate it clearly. You can even counsel others using that language, and still have your body and your subconscious operating as though the war is ongoing. That gap between intellectual knowing and embodied knowing is precisely where so many chosen people live, suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. You must break agreement with the lingering narrative of the one who is always fighting. That narrative, while it was formed in truth, has now outlived its usefulness. It was an accurate description of a season. It was never meant to be a permanent identity. You were in the crucible, yes, but you emerged. And what emerges from the crucible is not the same substance that entered it. It is refined, it is purified. It has been stripped of everything that was not essential, and what remains is the truest, most concentrated version of what was always within you. Your identity is no longer defined by the struggle, but by the victory and the purpose it refined you for. This requires a deliberate act of internal renegotiation. You must sit with yourself honestly and ask the question that most people are afraid to ask. Who am I if I am not the one who is fighting? Because for many of you, the fight has been so central, so constant, so defining, that the absence of it feels disorienting rather than liberating. Peace can feel suspicious to a soul that has only known warfare. Stillness can feel dangerous to a spirit that has only known movement under pressure. But this disorientation is not a sign that something is wrong. It is actually the first sign that something has profoundly changed. Just as Paul declared himself crucified with Christ, no longer living according to his old self, you must metaphorically bury the combatant and resurrect the conqueror within. Paul understood that the death of the old self was not a tragedy. It was the necessary precondition for the emergence of something that could carry the weight of divine purpose without being crushed by it. The combatant served its time. Honor it for what it carried you through, and then lay it down with intention and with finality. But here's where it goes deeper. It's not enough to break agreement with the old identity. You must release the story of the struggle itself. This is the part that requires tremendous courage and radical honesty, because sometimes the drama of past suffering can become an unconscious comfort zone, a familiar narrative that keeps us from embracing the expansive, unfamiliar landscape of peace. Think about how central your story of difficulty has become to the way you understand yourself. Think about how many conversations begin with where you came from, what you survived, who tried to destroy you. And while testimony is powerful, while the story of your survival carries genuine anointing and authentic authority, there is a point at which the testimony becomes a tether. There is a point at which the telling and retelling of the suffering begins to anchor you more firmly to the pain than to the purpose. The Israelites, freed from Egypt, still yearned for the familiar bondage, simply because the freedom felt too vast, too undefined. This is one of the most psychologically and spiritually profound moments in all of Scripture, and it is so easy to read past it with judgment rather than recognition. How could they want to go back to slavery? How could they look back with longing at a place that had crushed them, that had stolen their children, that had broken their bodies? Because Egypt, for all its cruelty, was known. The rhythms of oppression were predictable. You knew what each day would demand of you. You knew the rules, even if the rules were unjust. You knew your role, even if that role was degrading. But the wilderness had no map. The manna fell each morning, but you couldn't store it. The cloud led you forward, but you couldn't store it. The cloud led you forward, but you couldn't chart the course in advance. Freedom, real freedom, requires you to operate in the unknown, to trust without a guarantee, to walk without a visible path. And for a soul that has been shaped by survival, that kind of freedom doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like exposure. You must let go of the emotional attachment to the wilderness narrative, not because the wilderness wasn't real, not because what you endured wasn't genuinely hard, but because you are no longer in it, and carrying its atmosphere into your promised land is the surest way to turn your breakthrough into another form of bondage. And this leads us to something most people miss entirely. The silence you endured wasn't just a test of your resilience, it was a profound refining. It didn't just pass over you, it changed the very composition of your spirit. Consider this carefully, because there is a dimension of what you walked through that most people, even those who love you, cannot fully comprehend. The silence was not an absence of divine activity. The silence was the environment in which the deepest divine work was being done. When the furnace is at its hottest, there are no words. There is only the process. There is only the stripping away, the melting down, the removal of every impurity that would compromise the integrity of what is being formed. You are being forged into something new, something with greater integrity and purity, much like gold purified in the hottest fire, shedding its dross to reveal its true brilliance. Gold does not argue with the fire. Gold does not negotiate with the refiner. Gold simply yields, and in yielding it becomes something so pure, so luminous, so incorruptible that it becomes fit for royal use. You submitted to a process that most people run from. You stayed in the fire when every natural instinct was telling you to escape, and that staying, that willingness to be broken open rather than to break away, that is what has produced the quality of spirit you now carry. It is not a small thing. It is not an ordinary thing. It is the very thing that sets apart the chosen from the called, the refined from the merely religious. Coming up, the one thing most people avoid, but it's the key to everything. Now, once you understand that, you're ready for this, you must begin to discern the new voice emerging from that silence. This is where intentional spiritual attentiveness becomes absolutely essential, because there are many voices available to you in the aftermath of a great trial. There is the voice of relief, which is wonderful but temporary. There is the voice of analysis, which tries to make sense of everything you endured. There is the voice of ambition, eager to make up for lost time. And beneath all of those louder, more insistent voices is a quieter, more authoritative frequency. No longer the panicked whisper of survival, nor the echoes of your past wounds, but the clear, resonant frequency of your true calling, your divine blueprint. This voice does not compete, it does not shout, it does not perform for your attention. It simply is, steady and unwavering, carrying the full weight of divine intention for your life. This is the voice that Samuel heard, distinct from the familiar voice of Eli, calling him to a new kind of service. Samuel had grown up in the temple. He knew Eli's voice intimately. He had organized his entire understanding of divine communication around that familiar sound. And so when a genuinely new voice began to speak, his first response was to interpret it through his existing framework, to assume it was coming from someone he already knew, someone who fit within his established understanding of how God communicates. How many times have you done the same? How many times has the new voice of your next season been filtered through the lens of your old experiences, misidentified, dismissed, or delayed because it didn't sound like what you expected? It requires a deliberate quieting of all other noise, a tuning of your spiritual ear. This means creating genuine space for silence. Not the enforced silence of the wilderness you just came through, but a chosen silence, a cultivated stillness that you step into with intention and with expectation. It means spending time in a quality of prayer that is less about speaking and more about listening. It means being willing to sit with the unfamiliar frequency of this new voice until it becomes recognizable, until your spirit learns to distinguish it from every other sound competing for your attention. This brings us to the real turning point. The confrontation with the fear of visibility after being hidden. You've grown powerful in the shadows, refined in the unseen. And that is the paradox that most people cannot see clearly about themselves. The very hiddenness that felt like punishment, the years of being overlooked, underestimated, and passed over, was actually the condition that produced depth. You went down into the ground like a seed, and in that dark, confined, invisible space, you developed root systems that most people never develop, because most people never stay in the ground long enough. But the anointing you carry now demands to be seen, to be expressed. A tree that only ever develops roots but never produces branches has missed the second half of its purpose. The depth was never meant to be the final destination. The depth was always in service of the eventual height. The fear of exposure, of stepping out from behind the veil of your silent battles, can be paralyzing. And this is important to name clearly, because it is so easy to spiritualize this particular fear into something that sounds like humility. It is so easy to say you are waiting on God's timing when what you are actually doing is waiting for the fear to go away before you step forward. But the fear will not go away before you step forward. The fear only loses its power in the act of movement itself. It's akin to Moses at the burning bush, filled with excuses, not because he lacked ability, but because he feared the magnitude of the assignment that would make him visible. Moses had spent 40 years in obscurity. 40 years in the desert, tending sheep, living a life that bore no visible resemblance to the destiny he had once been marked for. And in those 40 years, he had made peace with invisibility. He had made peace with smallness. And so, when God appeared in the burning bush and called him back into his purpose, the resistance that arose was not laziness. It was the deeply ingrained comfort of someone who had learned to live within the limits of their own diminishment. But God was not interested in Moses' comfort. God was interested in an entire people's liberation. And that liberation required Moses to confront his fear of visibility and step forward anyway. And yet, there's something beneath even that reluctance. Your very vessel, your physical body, needs to catch up to the spiritual victory you've achieved. This is something that is rarely addressed in conversations about spiritual breakthrough. And its absence from the conversation leaves people confused about why they still feel burdened even after genuine transformation has occurred. Your body is not separate from your spiritual journey. It is the sacred container through which every battle was experienced, and it carries the imprint of each one. Every season of prolonged stress, every night of agonized prayer, every moment of having to hold yourself together when everything in you wanted to fall apart, your nervous system registered all of it. Your muscles held the tension of it. Your breath patterns adapted to accommodate the weight of it. Your body learned to function in a state of chronic alertness because that alertness was necessary for your survival. It has been a silent witness to your battles, holding tension, stress, and the memory of every blow. Your body is a temple, and it deserves to reflect the peace, strength, and vibrancy of a soul that has won. This means that your physical healing and your physical renewal are not secondary concerns. They are not luxuries to be addressed once everything else is sorted. They are integral to the completion of your breakthrough. Until you bring your body into alignment with your spiritual triumph, allowing it to release the residual trauma and embrace the lightness of breakthrough, you will continue to carry the energetic imprint of the fight. You will find yourself exhausted without knowing why. You will find yourself triggered by small things, because your body is still interpreting small stimuli through the heightened sensitivity of a system that has been on high alert for a very long time. Breathe. Move. Rest with intention. Allow your body the grace of transition. Let it know physically and deliberately that the war is over and it is safe to soften. In just a moment, we'll uncover what's been hidden in plain sight. What most people don't realize is the critical need to clear the energetic attachments from those past battles. This is a layer of the healing process that operates beneath what is visible, beneath what can be easily articulated or easily categorized. It's not just about forgiving those who wronged you, but about consciously disconnecting from the energetic cords that still bind you to past pain, past agreements, past limitations. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, is absolutely necessary and non-negotiable. But forgiveness alone does not automatically sever every connection. You can genuinely forgive someone and still carry a residual energetic attachment to what they did, to the dynamic that existed between you, to the version of yourself that was shaped in response to their actions. Imagine severing invisible threads that, though thin, still tether you to old wounds and old ways of being. Picture those threads with me for a moment. They run from your heart, your mind, your solar plexus, backward into every significant wound, every broken relationship, every moment of betrayal or abandonment or injustice. Individually, each thread might seem insignificant, but collectively, they create a web of backward-facing energy that quietly drains the vitality that is meant to propel you forward. This is a deliberate act of spiritual hygiene, essential for true freedom. And like all hygiene, it is not a one-time event. It is a practice. It is something you return to regularly, with intention and with the authority of someone who understands that they are no longer subject to the claims of their past. You stand in the power of what has been won. And from that position of genuine authority, you declare that the old cords no longer have access to your energy, your attention, or your future. And if you're honest with yourself, there's a false humility that might be keeping you small. This one requires the most exquisite discernment, because it does not look like a problem from the outside. It does not present itself as fear or resistance. It wraps itself in the language of patience, of waiting on God, of not wanting to get ahead of yourself. It's the subtle belief that you're not truly ready, not truly worthy of the expansive future God has for you. It sounds like humility, but it's often fear masquerading as modesty, a refusal to step into the fullness of your divine inheritance. The difference between true humility and false humility is this. True humility says, I know I cannot do this in my own strength, but I trust the one who has prepared me, and I step forward in that trust. False humility says, I'm not ready, I'm not enough, let someone else go first, and it uses the language of surrender to avoid the responsibility of assignment. Remember Gideon, who doubted his own strength and calling until God continually affirmed him. Gideon's initial response to the angel's greeting, "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor," was to argue the facts of his circumstances. He pointed to the oppression of his people, to the absence of miracles, to his own inadequacy, to his family's insignificance. Every piece of evidence he offered was, on the surface, accurate, and yet none of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was that he had been selected, set apart, and anointed for an assignment that his current circumstances could not reflect, because the assignment existed not in his present reality, but in God's eternal intention. Your worthiness was sealed before you were born, not because of what you would do, not because of how well you would perform, not because of the battles you would win or the wilderness you would survive, Your worthiness was sealed by the intentional, sovereign act of a God who saw the full scope of your existence before you drew your first breath and said, "This one, this is the one I want for this assignment." Hidden underneath that truth is another one. You are a divine disruptor. The very trials you endured, the silent victories you claimed, were all part of God's strategy to forge you into a force that will shake complacency, challenge stagnant systems, and usher in new truth. Let that land in the deepest part of you. The strategy was not merely to get you through. The strategy was to produce in you something that the world around you desperately needs but does not yet know how to ask for. When God allows someone to go through what you went through, it is never without intentional purpose. The depth of the opposition you faced is proportional to the significance of what you carry. Small assignments do not attract the kind of opposition that has followed you. Ordinary destinies do not require the extraordinary refinement you underwent. You are not meant to blend in. You are meant to stand out. And not in the shallow, performative way that the world defines standing out, but in the profound, irreplaceable, unmistakably anointed way that happens when someone has been genuinely transformed by fire. When you walk into a room carrying the weight of what you've been through and the glory of what you've emerged into, something shifts. Something in the atmosphere recognizes what you carry. People are drawn to an authenticity they cannot name, but can absolutely feel. Embrace the fire of your prophetic assignment, knowing that your journey wasn't just for you, but for the generations you are destined to impact. Every ancestor who prayed into the future without knowing what they were praying toward was praying you into existence. Every generation that follows you will benefit from the ground you are breaking right now, in this moment, by choosing not to go back, by choosing to fully emerge, by choosing to stand in the fullness of what you have been forged to be. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share next is the part that breaks the cycle. And here's the part you probably didn't expect, the one that truly enters the confrontation zone. The thing that's been blocking your full manifestation isn't the enemy, it's not your past, nor even the people who hurt you. It's a hidden agreement you made with the safety of the struggle itself. This is perhaps the most confronting truth in this entire conversation, because it requires you to look at your own interior world with radical honesty and acknowledge something that the spiritual ego does not want to admit. The struggle, however painful, became predictable. It offered a perverse kind of comfort in its familiarity, a known devil. When you are in a difficult season long enough, your entire internal system calibrates itself around that difficulty. Your prayers are calibrated to it. Your faith is calibrated to it because your faith is accustomed to believing for deliverance, for breakthrough, for the end of suffering. But what happens when the deliverance comes? What happens when the breakthrough arrives? What does your faith calibrate itself toward then? If you have not intentionally answered that question, your system will default to what it knows. It will find or create new struggles, because without them, there is no framework for engaging with life, with God, with your own sense of purpose and identity. And until you break that unconscious loyalty to the comfort of the familiar fight, you'll keep recreating its patterns in your future. New people, same dynamics. New circumstances, same emotional weather. New seasons, same internal temperature, because the external landscape keeps changing, but the internal agreement remains constant. Breaking that agreement is one of the most fundamentally transformative things a human being can do. It is an act of profound spiritual courage, because it requires you to trust that a life not organized around struggle is still a life in which God is present, active, and glorified. What's truly holding you back then is your loyalty to the old version of yourself, the one who survived the test, the one who fought in silence. You become so adept at being that person that you haven't given yourself full permission to become the next version, the one who lives in victory, who thrives in peace, who steps into the spotlight of their calling. There is an extraordinary kind of grief that can accompany genuine transformation, and it is rarely discussed. The grief of releasing an old self is real, even when that old self was suffering, because that old self was you. That old self was you. That old self was the one who prayed through the nights. That old self was the one who held on when everything said let go. That old self deserves to be honored, not clung to, but honored. There is a difference. It's a self-imposed limitation, a reluctance to shed the skin of the survivor for the mantle of the sovereign. A serpent does not mourn its shed skin. It does not look back at what it has left behind and wish it could return to the confines of something it has already outgrown. It simply moves forward in its new skin, more alive, more free, more fully itself. Your greatest challenge now is to release the identity of the one who won and fully embody the one who is victorious. The one who won is past tense. The one who is victorious is present tense, ongoing, continuous, a state of being rather than a memory of an event. You are not someone who won a battle. You are victorious. You carry victory as a present reality, not a historical achievement. Tonight, before you sleep, place your hand on your heart and declare this with me. I release every last trace of the battleground from my spirit, my soul, and my body. I release the need to prove my worthiness through struggle. I break agreement with every identity forged in the fire of past pain. I step fully into the victory that has already been won. I embrace my true, whole, and powerful self. My body is a temple of peace and power, reflecting the divine truth within. I am not merely surviving, I am thriving. I am ready to receive and steward the overflow of blessings that await me. And I move forward as the chosen one, prepared for all that God has ordained. Say those words and mean them. Let them move from your mouth into your chest, from your chest into your blood, from your blood into the very cellular memory of your body. Let every part of you that is still carrying the posture of the battle receive the permission it has been waiting for, the permission to rest, the permission to receive, the permission to be without the qualifier of struggle attached to your existence. You have fought enough, you have proven enough, you have endured enough. The God who forged you in the fire is the same God who calls you out of it and says, now walk. Walk in what I have prepared you for. Walk in the fullness of what the fire revealed. Walk as the one I always saw you to be, before the world named you by your suffering, before the battle gave you its identity, before you forgot that the war was always mine to win, and yours to witness from a position of divine alignment. The battlefield is behind you. The promised land is beneath your feet, and every step you take in the full consciousness of your victory is an act of worship, a declaration that the silence was not wasted, the fire was not random, and the God who brought you through it all is worthy of being trusted with everything that comes next.